basic intro to subject to transactions. And then we're going to actually have Tucker somewhere. Tucker's going to be nice enough to help speak next month. And he's going to go over kind of like a deeper section of kind of subject to and seller finance for wraps. So that'll be cool. So Tucker will do that next month in October. November, we'll have the PACE meetup. I don't know if we'll do 2 meetups because it won't be exactly the third Tuesday, but we'll probably just do the one. And then if you guys have questions as I'm going through this, I'm not like big on just talking the whole time. So if you have questions, because I'm sure things will come up, any objections or concerns that you might have as a seller or buyer, like as we're going through this, feel free, just chime in and we can talk about it. And then we'll do some questions at the end too. So, and intro, my name is Josh Colbo, because there are a lot of new people here this week. So thanks for everybody coming. This is a Subto meetup. Subto is a community, like investment community, and then Pace Morby started that. So Pace is the one coming to the event next in November. And then he started Gator out of Subto. Gator is more on the lending side. So I know Jacob, sounds like Lance, a couple other, Alex is in Gator, a couple other people, and that's more on the lending side. Subto is more just like general investment, creative finance. It started out of subject to, hence the word Subto. So that's where that comes from. And I mean, I think everybody that's in them, highly recommend them. This is not a sales pitch or anything. They do help you out a lot though. I know I made so much money on my first deal after I just got into Subto. So definitely recommend it. And I think Jacob and Lance and Alex would all say the same. Anything he does is great. They just started a new like creative finance business buying section 2 called Zero Down 2.0. So I'm excited for that. I joined that one too. Going to go to Arizona where Pace is, and they're doing like a whole 3-day seminar next month. So I'm excited. I'll probably do some sort of talk on creative business buying then after that, because that's all pretty new to me. But hey, how's it going? Welcome. Yeah, come in. We're just starting. All right. So subject to transaction kind of falls under the seller finance realm of transactions for real estate, being that we are leveraging somebody's financial position so that we can take over their loan. Just like in seller finance, you're going to give a loan to a buyer for the property that you already own. And so same thing on subject to, we're going to do the same thing. You're not giving them a new loan necessarily, but we are going to pass off our financial position and leverage the debt that you already have under your name, and we're going to give it to somebody else. So kind of first step is the buyer takes ownership of the property, and they buy it subject to, and subject to basically just means we're taking it subject to the debt that's already in place or the mortgage that's in place. You can do subject to on a lot of different types of loans, FHA, conventional, VA. You can even take over some solar. There's a lot of different liens that you can kind of take over subject to. The seller's name stays in place on their mortgage. So if I'm going to go sell my house that I got for my primary residence, it's got me and my wife's name on it, that's going to stay on the mortgage when I pass off the house to the next person. So the buyer then is obligated to make those payments on my behalf going forward. And then after that, the buyer is going to receive the deed. The deed is the receipt for the property, basically says who's the owner of the property, so they're going to take that over. Any questions so far? All right. So when that is done, the seller has no responsibility to the property. This is a common question I get from agents and sellers when we're discussing this as an option for them. A lot of times they'll think, oh, like I don't want to be tied to the property anymore. I don't want to like take care of the tenants or the toilets or anything like that. So there is no responsibility to the seller. They don't have to pay the taxes. They don't have to pay the insurance. All that stuff comes onto the buyer. And then one of the biggest things on this is like, sure, you are selling the property and you are no longer the owner of the property, but since we still have that mortgage in place and your name on it, we kind of treat that as like a short-term marriage, because we want to be cordial in this relationship, and we want to be transparent throughout the whole process from start to finish, because it could kind of blow up if you have one person that's saying yes, 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 but in the back of their heads they're thinking like, I'm going to sabotage this, or they just have malicious plans. There's a number of ways that somebody could blow something up like this, and so you just want to make sure that both ends are transparent and honest in what's going on, and then getting all the paperwork in place for all this. Question, Mike?
So what about a due on sale clause?
Great question. We will get to that. That's typically like the boogeyman of subject to is that there's a due on sale clause. And so that would be in pretty much any mortgage that somebody's going to have. It'll have the due on sale clause. And what that basically, most of them are pretty similar to what they would say, but basically says the bank has the right to call the note due or the loan due if the property is sold. But it doesn't say they have to. It doesn't say it's illegal for somebody to sell a property. It just gives the bank the right to call the note due.
But do you actually, you were saying transparency, do you let the bank know what you're doing?
So on a subject to transaction, we don't have to get the bank's approval for it. And we'll talk more about that too. But that's one of the biggest differences between doing a subject to transaction and an assumption, which is another slide I have too, is you don't have to get formal approval from the bank. You don't like it. You don't like it.
Outside the box.
Yeah.
Mortgage insurance. So normally when you sell a property and you close on it and somebody's getting mortgage insurance, I don't know. I'll just listen.
Yeah. No, it's great questions, and hopefully some of them get answered here. So just a little like different example to show this. So when we are buying a property, subject to, there is the deed, that's kind of the receipt, and then there's the mortgage. Those are the two things that we are kind of passing off. So like I said, the mortgage stays in the seller's name, so that's our one part. And then we have the deed, which transfers to the new buyer, and that's the receipt, says who owns it. So one example that really helped me when I was first learning all this was like, you go to Costco, you take your Costco card, it's a credit card. It's pretty similar to a mortgage. You're going to go buy some groceries with that credit card. Once you buy it, you put your credit card down, you get the groceries. Who's the new owner of those groceries? The grocery shopper. So we got grocery shopper here, buys the groceries with a credit card. Did this person put any money in? They haven't put any money in yet. So, but they own the property, or they own the groceries. So they're given a receipt that says, hey, you can now walk out of Costco. They're gonna, do the little check off and write you a smiley face on the receipt saying that you're good to take these groceries out the door. So we take that receipt outside the door, and there's a dude sitting out there. He doesn't have a Costco membership. So he's gonna leverage this guy that's coming out with his Costco membership. He's got his groceries, and he's got his receipt. And we're going to give him a little bit of money to take over those groceries. We're going to take his groceries, and then we're going to pay him kind of over time. And that's going to pay off the credit card. So that's kind of a helpful example that I liked, kind of just frame it in a different aspect. But you got the receipt for the groceries. You got the groceries. Both of them are going to the new guy, but nobody's going and paying off that credit card. All good. No one's going to pay off that credit card right then. He's probably got 30, 60 days to go pay off that credit card. So that's kind of an example for that. All right, so why subject to? There's a handful of reasons, but one of the biggest things for us as investors or realtors, whatever it may be, is that this is just another tool in our toolbox to solve somebody's problems. I'm a realtor. I'm also an investor. I also wholesale, so I do a lot of different things, and this is just one more thing that I can add to my tool belt to solve someone's problem. So one of the biggest things is like a property goes on market, they're all excited. They want to get their multiple offers within 2 weeks of listing the property. Right now, there's a lot of properties sitting on the market. I think we're at the highest inventory in Omaha that it's been since like 2016. We've got a lot of properties just sitting. So if you make it out of that first couple weeks, you're probably going to be sitting for a while, or you're going to have to drop the price before you sell the property. So this is one way that we can give them a higher purchase price. Like if people are listing their house for $300 and people are giving them offers for $250, like this is a way that we can come, give them a higher purchase price, and sell their property, and both people are happy. And then another big reason why people would do this on the seller side is that they might be underwater. There's a lot of times where somebody is trying to sell their property, or they need to sell for whatever reason, and they're going to have to write a check to sell their property. And I don't know anybody that wants to go sell their house and bring a check or cash to close to have somebody take their house. So, and a lot of times, if they're in this situation, they're probably in foreclosure, they're probably behind, they probably have some arrears, maybe some tax liens, all these things that need to be paid off if they sell a property. And if they're in that situation, they probably don't have the cash to just go pay those off to sell it. So this is another way that we can kind of solve those problems. And then I put up there like cash offers. I'm sure everybody's familiar. Cash offer. When you go do a cash offer, are you going to offer, if it's listed for $300, how much are you guys going to offer if you're paying cash? 150, 70%. All right. So if that person doesn't have the ability to discount it 30 grand or 30%, does that solve their problem? Cash. Okay, so then on the flip side, we have the traditional finance people. You could come in with an investor loan or a primary residence loan, FHA, whatever, and you can do the traditional finance thing. But people are not paying, if it's sitting on market for that long, nobody wants to pay that because the interest rates are too high. People are picky right now. They don't like the blinds that come on the house, or they don't like the paint color, and they don't know that you can paint it for a couple grand type of thing. So people are really picky, and they're just going to pass on it. So this is a way that we can come and we can give them a solution to sell their house if they really need to.
Josh, would it be safe to assume that most of the sellers are not looking to purchase another property? Right? 'Cause I would assume that their debt to income would suffer if they're going to hold the mortgage in their name.
Yeah, so sometimes they aren't looking to buy because they've been racking up so much debt. Maybe they've crushed their credit because they've been sitting on it for 6 months and they have auction coming up soon. Those situations, they're just probably going to go rent afterwards, and so it's not an issue. There's usually people that, they're never going to buy another house again, or it's 2 to 5 years out, not an issue for them. Then there's people that are like, I might buy in the next 12 months type of thing. They're, a little bit easier to work with just because that DTI, debt to income ratio question, usually gets written off. I think it's up to 75% after the first year, just with a normal lender. You just go to Rocket Mortgage and you say, hey, I sold this house subject to, somebody's paying it. They're like, oh, it's 12 months in the past. No problem, we can write most of that off. The bigger concern is when it's under 12 months. If somebody is going to go buy a house and they're a lot of times for VA loans, somebody's moving a lot for the military, and so they're going to go buy another one right away. Those are the ones that we really want to help get their financial position situated right away, and we can do that. If you go to Rocket Mortgage or just your typical lender, they're not going to know what to do with it, and they're going to say, that's on there for at least 12 months. And so what we do is we give them to a lender that knows about subject to, knows how to work with it. They have some fancy paperwork, basically treating it like a lease, because we are setting up paperwork in the transaction that shows the new buyer is going to be obligated to pay their mortgage for the remainder of the loan. And so that puts it in, and that can write off the debt to income ratio. I'm not sure if it's 100% that they write off for it, but there is a percentage. And usually that's when I pass it off to my lender that works on these. and then they'll usually want to have a call, and I recommend they have a call with the lender first, because then everyone's situation is a little bit different. That way they can have a plan like right from the start before they sign anything to know that they're going to be able to get a loan, and that guy is going to give them the loan type of thing. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. So go ahead.
You have done a subject to purchase then?
Yep.
And stuff.
Yeah, I'll have one of my deals for a breakdown at the end to specifically go over.
So
It's a little.
we call you the unicorn agent then?
You could call me a unicorn agent. That's kind of the. There's a lot of sub-2 lingo or gator lending lingo that Pace is very creative in his terminology. So unicorn agent is basically a realtor that would, knows creative finance strategies, knows investing strategies, not just your typical realtor that, hey, you got a pretty house, I'd love to sell your pretty house, and there's no problems with it. We'll take some photos of it, we'll put it online, we'll have everybody come in through an open house, and then we'll sell the house. It'll be great. That's your, typical agent. I know there's a lot more that goes into it, and there's a lot of really good agents, but we all know there's about 70% of them that just sit at home and, wait for that cousin to call them and sell their house. So that's a unicorn agent. Seller pros and cons here. So kind of a couple of things we touched on, but one of the biggest reasons to sell your house this way is a higher sales price. And then that kind of goes down to kind of in turn with less cost to sell. So potential for more upfront cash than you would get selling it, traditionally. Because in a traditional sale, if you're not familiar, typically there's two realtors. There's a listing agent, there's a buyer's agent, and that's going to take up around 6% commission. And so that takes down the net that seller is going to walk away with. So in these situations, a lot of times we'll offer to pay or waive a buyer's agent commission. We usually take care of the seller's, the listing agent commission, or the cash that we give the seller, they're paying their agent if they have something else worked out with them, and it just works out that way. I've had both happen. And then typically we'll pay all the closing costs in this scenario too. Just another reason to give them a benefit to selling this way. And then a lot of times they don't have any money to bring to close. So if you're splitting closing costs 50-50, that might be difficult for them. And then another big reason is to avoid foreclosure. This could save your credit as a seller. If you're headed toward auction and everything, you don't want that on your credit history, because that's going to set you back another 7 years to buy a home. And so this is one way that we can also repair credit. I think I have that. Yeah, you can protect your seller's credit on there. If they have already started taking a lot of hits on credit and they're down, now that we have payments being made by hopefully a trustworthy investor, that's going to start building their credit along the way instead of hurting it when they were missing payments. There's no appraisals on a subject to loan. There's no bank that's coming in and saying like, oh, this has got to be worth X amount, or you can't buy it type of thing. So that's great. It's faster. You can close in about 14 to 21 days. So pretty quick there. And then when plan A is, you list it on the market, you sell it in 2 weeks, and you get your asking price or more. That's plan A. And when that doesn't happen and you're 30 to 90 days out, they start looking for plan Bs. And this is our plan B. So some of the cons, I think people have said. One is DTI concerns, debt to income ratio. So that's what lenders use to underwrite you to qualify for a new loan if you're buying another house. If you're not buying another house, it's not a big deal. Usually the biggest issue that sellers have with it is that the loan does stay in their name. So even though it can protect your credit and build your credit, it can also destroy your credit if you get a bad person in there and they start defaulting on your loan. The due on sale clause risk is what Mike was talking about. And so that is another big one. It is rare that it happens, but you do hear of people. I've never had it happen to me. There's plenty there's handfuls of people in sub 2 that it's happened to, but we set that up in the paperwork beforehand so that there are plan Bs and Cs if that happens. So we can dive deeper into that later if you guys want. And then the seller doesn't have any control really over the property after it's gone. It's the new owners. They can't decide what the person paints it or who they rent it to, anything like that. And they're usually not going to be able to stay there any longer. It's a big no-no to let anybody stay in the property if they are the seller on a subject to. It creates more liability, and they're already in probably a sticky situation. So if they're not paying the bank, they're probably not going to pay you. So just don't do that, even though we want to be nice a lot of times in these situations. It's not usually the best scenario for anybody, and you're going to be in the same situation. And it is a little more complicated as we're doing this, talk about it. It's not your normal transaction, so it does take a bit of negotiating and, walking sellers and agents through this transaction and if it's going to be a good fit for them. So usually it's multiple calls up front and, even a Zoom or maybe we meet in person, that type of thing. And then there's probably an attorney. They're going to probably go talk to an attorney and they'll give them a thumbs up or thumbs down. So there's just more complication on it. But usually these people are pretty motivated and they want to find a solution. So buyer side, biggest pros on the buyer side is you're typically going to get a lower interest rate than you could get on the market right now. We're in the 7 to 8% range for interest rates, especially on like investor loans. So if you can get a 4 or 5% loan from a couple years ago, that's going to get you a lot better opportunity for cash flow than getting a new loan. And then so your monthly payment's going to be lower, always good. And then there's no need to qualify typically for these loans. I have had situations where we work with somebody that actually kind of underwrites a buyer, and we'll go through some income verifications and things like that. And I would recommend doing that. It's helpful. It does give the seller more peace of mind too, that you're not just selling it to some random guy that has no ability to pay the loan after it's sold. And then there's no new loan costs. Whenever you get a new loan, there's lots of fees that go into paying the bank for originating the loan, appraisal fee, hard money. You usually have a point or two of costs up front to originate a new loan. So we're kind of keeping the banks out of it, and we're just working seller to buyer. And then, like I said, it's a quick closing process, so it's a big pro when you're writing your offers. You can close quicker than a typical transaction that takes 30 days sometimes for a regular loan. You can do this in 10 to 21 days. And then you typically need less cash, less down payment, so your entry fee to get into the deal is typically lower. So the two big things, in my opinion, is that you're going to get a lower interest rate, lower monthly payment, and then you're going to have less money to put into the deal. A lot of times, if you're getting an investor loan, you're going to have to pay 20 to 30% down on the property. And so you're going to have more capital up front. Sometimes these can go anywhere from 5 to 20% entry fee, and then on top of a lower interest rate. And you don't have to qualify. And one of the biggest things people always question is why would I sell this to somebody that can't qualify for a regular loan? And there's a lot of people, maybe even in this room, that they're self-employed, they have great income, but the bank's biased toward W-2 earners for their loans. So not everyone that makes a lot of money can actually qualify for a loan. Any questions so far?
Quick question.
Yeah.
What would happen if the person holding the loan went to foreclosure, and then they were, what happens to the debt?
If they default and then it goes to foreclosure?
Yeah.
So then the seller would they would go to foreclosure, typical to how a normal bank would do it. And then once that is done, they get the property back. And then they're kind of in the same situation again. But ideally that happens, ideally it doesn't happen. But if it happens, 2 or 3 years down the road, the market has probably cycled through the dip that it was in. you've ideally had appreciation in that 2 to 3 years. So your house is going to be worth more than it was when you were trying to sell 2 or 3 years ago. And then, so you can sell it for a higher price. And then along those 2 to 3 years, the seller or the buyer was making payments on the loan. So they're building equity in the property.
This is a sale, essentially.
Yeah, it would force it to come back to the old owner. And then they could sell it or they could rent it. They could move back into it. They keep all the payments that the seller had made up till that point. And if they give them a down payment, you know, they gave them $20K to start, and they foreclose and take the property back, they don't have to like go give that $20K back to the buyer because they took the property back. Like they forfeit anything. Any improvements on the property, like they don't have to, it's all just goes back to the seller. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense.
That would be all written out in the contract and discussed and stuff
Yep.
beforehand.
Yep. Yeah. So in these situations, there's a deed of trust and a promissory note, and those combined give you all the protections as long as they're written up correctly. So typically, we'll have an attorney, you know, write those up and make sure that everything's clear. How long before you can, like, what defines a default? How long before you can start foreclosure? I put this later, but there's a instead of doing a foreclosure, you can do a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So if you have that agreed upon beforehand, and the seller or the buyer is cordial in this scenario where they default and they're not able to make payments, they can sign the deed in lieu of foreclosure, and that just basically sends the property back to the seller without having to go through the foreclosure process. Obviously, foreclosure is not ideal. It takes a little bit of time. You know, I think it's like 90 days on the shortest to go from notice of default all the way to auction or taking the property back. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's pretty much what I figured that the contract would state how it would be handled.
Yep.
So
Yeah, but it brings up the big importance of having your paperwork done correctly and all the proper addendums, everything done up front.
So, like, you know what a 1099-C is?
No.
So if you, say a person's debt's 200, they just do a short 180, essentially they've gained 20,000 in revenue. So if a realtor doesn't know what he's doing when he puts it, they work through that, that person's actually gonna be responsible for that $20,000 at
If-
the end of the year, if the realtor doesn't write it up right.
If there's some liens that are not fully being taken care of, is that what you're saying?
So, like we were talking, like a short sale.
Yeah.
The person's debt is 200, they can't pay, goes on the market, they get sold at 180. If you finalize that deal and they don't get the paperwork of 1099-C, the IRS can actually send them W-2 saying, hey, you they can say that you owe us,
Yeah.
you gained 20,000 in revenue.
Okay.
So I'm just curious if you ran across
I have not run across that.
tax liability.
No, there are, I'll come to this later, but there is, you know, tax code in the IRS that specifically handles subject to stuff. I'm sure it handles short sale situations as well. But typically, this is a solution for somebody before we get to short sale. It would be like, I think short sale can be a great option for people, but like one seller I was just working with, they didn't want to do a short sale because they wanted to save their credit and they didn't have like a financial hardship, so they couldn't really qualify for the short sale.
So then again, the short pay,
Yeah,
and that saves all of that, but
yeah, I'm curious about that, but I haven't run across that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. And then in these situations, a lot of times there's not a ton of repairs. Like in a cash deal, usually there's a lot of rehab and things like that. So these are a little bit more turnkey, typically, at least what I'm targeting and what most people have success with. Because if you do this with a house that needs tons of repairs, that just kind of adds to your entry fee. If it needs 50 grand in repairs and you're giving it 30K, now you're at like 40% into this deal. And you could just go find a different property that's turnkey on the market and get an investor loan for 30% down. So biggest cons in this scenario is the loan could be called due. But as long as we have the paperwork situated for that, then we can mitigate those risks and work through that if it happens. And then you typically have to, pay off any of the liens or arrears, tax liens, anything needs to be paid off, except for the ones that you're going to be taking over. And then it will be a higher purchase price. If you go cash, you can get a discount typically. This will be your higher purchase price, but you're leveraging the financial position of the seller. And then it will be harder to sell since you are paying a higher price. If you get into a bind or you didn't do your underwriting right and you don't have an exit strategy to rent this property afterwards, you could, get in a bind and now you're defaulting. And if you don't have some cash saved up, then you're going to be in a sticky situation and you're going to put the seller in a sticky situation. So that's another reason why we want to be, very careful when we're underwriting these so that everybody is protected through the life of the transaction. And then it is a little bit more complex on the legal side. You probably want to have an attorney involved. There's more paperwork than typical. So then just like a cash sale, you don't need a whole lot of paperwork for a cash sale. So subject to versus a loan assumption. We've kind of gone through most of the subject to stuff, but the biggest things here on a loan assumption, because a lot of times when I'm talking to a realtor, they're going to say, well, so you're going to do an assumption, and assumption is different because you're going to formally assume and take over the loan. So there's going to be new underwriting that is done on the buyer, which is one of the biggest reasons that you want to do subject to, is that you don't have to go through all the underwriting. You don't have to spend the time. It's much longer. It takes 2 to 6 months to do a loan assumption. 2 is typically the least that I ever hear. And there was one lead I followed up on for 6 months, and they were still waiting for their buyer to assume the loan while it sat there on market vacant, and they were paying on the mortgage. So it takes a lot longer to do assumption. One of the biggest things for us as investors, you can't assume a loan that you're not going to live in. So it typically has to be a primary residence and not an investor loan. So that's another reason we can't do it. And then a lot of times they'll change the interest rates on these. If you go qualify for this loan, you take it over, they might mark it up to the current interest rates. And then there's more paperwork. There's also more costs. Typically, they have some fees associated with it. But the biggest pros on this situation is that if you have like a primary resident buyer and you want to go live in the house, this is a great option because it totally takes it off the seller's name. They're not liable for this anymore once they do assumption. Any questions on assumptions?
Have you ever found that conventional loans can be assumed at all? Do any lenders allow that, or is it just FHA?
A lot of times they say that conventional are not, but I had a conventional on my primary residence that I sold last, and we looked into having it assumed by a friend of mine, and they said it could be, but they were going to change the rates. So I think it's possible to do it conventional. I've never done it, but I know there are some out there that don't allow it. Anybody else?
Can you assume a multifamily property if you're going to live in one of these?
I've never tried it, but I think it would, based off of, like, you can get a loan, you can qualify for a loan that's 4 units or less with, I can't remember what the name of this, what you're referring to is, but yeah, you can buy one, so I think you could assume it too. So it'd be a great option for somebody that wants to house hack and get into something.
You typically can, and you don't have to live in one of the units if they have it on a commercial loan. So if it's over 5 units, a lot of those commercial loans are assumable.
Oh, cool. Just for an investor that's just not going to live there or
We
anything.
assumed one last year. I did one on an apartment complex in Omaha that was through CBRE, and it was fully assumable.
Oh,
so
sweet.
It's kind of a perk of a lot of those commercial loans.
Did they change any of the terms, rates, or anything?
It took us like 8 months to get it closed, but they didn't change any of the terms
Yeah.
or anything.
It's crazy. I don't know what they're doing, that whole time. And it seems like usually realtors are like, oh no, it doesn't take that long to assume a loan. And it's like, yeah, something happens and it takes forever and the bank doesn't get back to you and you're 6 months down the road before it's done. So
But yeah, typically they make it just, so if it's like a have a commercial loan, so it needs to be rented out. So they look at it more from like a DSCR perspective. What's your business plan? And then if you're assuming a loan on like a duplex, that person got it in place as a primary residence loan, so they're going to make you like honor the terms of that loan right now. So that's how they look at it typically.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good info. So big question, is subject to legal? I'm not an attorney or a lawyer or anything, so not legal advice. But from my understanding, it's legal in all 50 states. A lot of people will tell you it's not legal. They usually just don't want to look into it, or they're not clear on what subject to actually is. And then a couple of just key points for why it is legal and why you can tell it is. In a HUD 1 form, it's like a purchase contract for what's that called? Housing and Urban Development. It's a federal form, and those lines 203 and 503 have lines for subject to transactions where you're taking over the mortgage. So, if it was the reasoning, then if you have a federal document that refers to subject to and the ability to do it, it's probably not illegal to do it. Same thing with the IRS. For tax code, they have a section that addresses subject to and installment sales and how an accountant can deal with those items. And then biggest thing is we want to be transparent with everybody involved on the transaction and have all the proper paperwork, addendums, all in place. There's a lot of redundant paperwork in our contracts that we use to make sure that the seller knows we are taking over the mortgage, it stays in their name, we're not paying it off until whatever date we set on. That's all in our subject to or sub to contracts. And then third-party loan servicing is another great way to help protect the seller and the buyer in the situation. It's just a third-party company that pays on your behalf. Basically, they'll auto-deduct from your bank account. They'll send it to the mortgage. They'll pay the insurance and taxes, all that stuff. And then it also sends an email to the seller every month saying, hey, your loan was paid on time, all is good. They'll also get an email if they don't get paid and it starts to default. So it's a great alert for them so they don't have to keep bugging the buyer and say, hey, are you still paying my loan? They will do it for you. And then that's a great way for you to get on top of the foreclosure if you need to. Any questions about legality? So kind of talked about this a little bit, but if a buyer defaults, this can definitely hurt the seller's credit. Ideally, you get on it very quickly and then figure it out with the seller or the buyer. I've had that happen before. They just were in the hospital for 2 months and didn't tell anybody and didn't have it on auto pay. So we had to go through that whole rigmarole with them. So and it started hurting the seller's credit, and so he was pissed. Next item is the deed in lieu of foreclosure. So this is a document that you can use to transfer the ownership of a property instead of doing foreclosure. And then if that doesn't work, you can do the foreclosure process. You can get the property back, all the payments, everything we talked about. You don't have to pay anything to that buyer for taking back the property. And then just make sure, like we talked about, you have the proper paperwork up front done so that we know what happens if A or B or C happens. We have a plan for those. And then use your servicing as well in the case of a default so that they know right away. So here's a simple example of just a subject to deal. So house value $300,000. We're going to buy the property for $300,000, and then there's a mortgage balance of $250,000 that we're going to take over at 4% interest. Then that would be in contrast to getting a new loan at 7% on the market, and then the buyer will pay $50,000 to the seller, to agents, any of those fees, and that will be their down payment or their entry fee to the property. And then you can see here you have a monthly principal and interest payment of about $1,200 for the 4% option, or if you went to 7% and just got a new loan, you'd be at close to $1,700. So that's just a very simple look. Does that all make sense? We need to get to that purchase price of 300,000, and we're getting there by the 250 that we take over, and then there's 50 grand left that we need to account for. So we're giving the seller cash in this scenario to get to 300. Jim, do you have a question?
Yeah, are you always paying the exact difference between the value and what's left on the mortgage? Is that always going to be the cash price that you're paying the seller?
It can be a couple different things. We'll go into a more complicated scenario, but I wanted to start basic here. But either we agree on a purchase price. You know, that could be like they could have listed it for 300,000, and we decided that the purchase price was 280. So now we only have 30 grand. So if you can negotiate that purchase price down, you can reduce that. And obviously, for us as a buyer, we want that to be as low as possible. The seller wants it to be as high as possible.
So I think kind of alluding to your question, so you're going through a title company on these closings?
Yeah,
The
title and
company's
escrow.
going to collect if there's any judgments or do property taxes, escrow, things like that?
Yep. Yeah, you get title insurance, everything just the same. We had one transaction where there was an HOA, there was a second HOA on the property, and that they owed a couple grand to, and nobody ever told us. It never came up in any of the title searches. And so we actually had to go back, and like 6 months later, when the HOA kept coming and trying to get the new owner to pay that old debt, we said, well, no, this was never disclosed to us, and we have insurance on this. So they went back. I think the title company actually paid for it, or however that insurance works that they have, that got paid out. All right, so kind of toward your question. So if we don't want to give that 50 grand to them, and we want to shrink that gap a little bit, we can do a hybrid deal. So if they have too much equity, we need to account for it, but we're going to account for it a little bit different way. So we're going to add subject to plus seller finance. That's going to give us our hybrid deal. Just a term for it, but basically we're just smashing the two together. They're similar but different, and we're going to combine those. So there's going to be two different payments that the buyer makes, one to the seller and one to the bank. And then we're going to add those together. So it'll have 2 monthly payments, but that will make up your total amount at the end of the day. And then we just, like, if it's too much, one of the goals of subject to is to get a low down payment. So if it's 40 or 50% that you have to pay to buy this property to take over the mortgage, it's probably not worth it. So this is a way we can shrink that gap and maybe get 10 to 20% into the property instead. And then the seller finance payment will be a second position. So for anybody that's not aware, a mortgage is typically your first position on lien, and so they're going to be the first ones to be paid off. That's the strongest position to be in. In case of a foreclosure or a sale, they're going to get paid first. And then second position is going to be the seller. So they don't have as much security, but if there was a foreclosure or there's a sale or something, they're going to get paid out second. And so if there's remaining cash after that first lender is paid off, they will get paid. And then here's an example, similar to what we were just talking about. $300K purchase price, and we're going to take over a loan that's $200,000. So there'd be $100,000 that we're going to have to make up for. So we're going to give the seller $50,000, but we're going to give it over time, and we're going to give them the same interest rate as the other loan. So 4%, that gets us to $250,000. We still have $50,000 that we need to cover, and that's going to be the cash to seller of $50,000, and that gets us to $300,000. And then we have 2 monthly payments here, just for example. So the subject to payment is going to be that $955, and then the seller finance payment is going to be $239, and that'll make up our total principal and interest payments of about $1,200. Obviously, you're still going to have taxes and insurance on top of that, but for simplicity, there is that. Any questions on hybrid?
How long of a term would you say is typical for the seller finance?
When I'm usually negotiating, I try to stick in the 7 to 10 year range, but obviously from the buyer side, 30 is great, or to the end of the loan. If it's just a straight subject to deal, a lot of times they'll be cool, especially if they're really motivated. They don't care. Just, you take over the loan and you can ride it till it's done.
Do you know what that was calculated based off
This was a 30-year on both. Yeah.
Have you ever wrote in, so let's say that 7 years, you got a balloon payment in there in the contract. Do you ever put anything in there that says if the market hasn't gone up or is not up at the time that the 7 years is up, then you have the option to get another 3 or 4 years before the next balloon payment would be due?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and for anyone that doesn't understand, balloon payment is we give some sort of date, even though we have 30 years, like I said, on this to pay this loan off, the seller wants it out of their name in 10 years. So in 10 years, we need to refinance, sell, or pay off that loan somehow. So that's going to be a hard deadline. It's all in the paperwork saying that we have to be ballooned out of this. We have to pay off the remaining debt at 10 years. And then, so your question was?
Have you ever did one where you said if the market was not where you
Oh,
wanted
yes.
it to
Okay.
be, then-
Yep. Yeah, we do. Like one I did last year was a VA loan, and it was, I think we did 7 years. And then, but he wanted 5 years. If the rate, we did it kind of opposite. If the interest rates went below 5% within or after 5 years, then the buyer had to refinance. So you can really do anything, but that's a great, example or question, and you can put it at 5 years, and you can't refinance, and you're negative on it, or it's not a certain rate, then you kick it out a year. You can put that in there. You can kick it out 2 years, whatever you want to do. So, but yeah, typical 7 to 10 years. A lot of sellers will want 1 to 2 years up front, and then you got to work them up to 7 to 10 years. Typically, an investor is not going to pay off an entire loan in 30 years. They're going to refinance it, take cash out, go buy another property. So typically, that's what I'll say is 7 to 10 years. We're probably going to refinance anyway at that time. So we just got to wait for the markets to cycle through and appreciation to happen or interest rates to go down or both. All right, so here's a deal breakdown. This one was in Maricopa, Arizona. This was a hybrid deal, so it gets a little complicated, so bear with me there, but just a little context for the seller. A realtor that's in Subto brought me this deal. They were the listing agent for it, and they sat on market for 60 days. It was a young couple with kids. They had moved out into Phoenix, it was about an hour away, and they were making double payments. And they had moved because they were kind of tight on cash anyway. So they were ready to sell this, week 1 of being on market. So 2 months in, they were feeling the heat, and they bought the property for $280,000 back in 2021. So a lot of times you'll notice, we bought this property in 2024. We didn't have a lot of time pass in between there because, you're not getting much equity, and so they're in a tight spot because they just bought it, and they're trying to sell it pretty quickly after, and the market took a dive in that time. And then they had 0 offers in that 60 days. They lowered the price a couple times. We came in, figured out what they needed to close. We gave them $25K cash. That paid their listing agent commission. And then we actually wholesaled this deal. So I made an assignment fee on this, and then a buyer paid a higher fee than, I think they paid $45K was their entry fee. And then, so that's what they paid down here. And they did not want to come out of pocket to pay this, and they did not want to lose their equity. So that was kind of the 2 big things for them. And they can't afford to keep making the mortgage payment to wait for an offer to come through. So the purchase price ended up being the $373 for the actual end buyer. We had the loan balance of $257,000, and they had a great rate at 2.875. So like compared to last year, what we're looking at, this was like an awesome deal for somebody. And then we seller financed it, $70,000. So that's our hybrid option there at 2.8%. And then on this, the IO stands for interest-only payments. So instead of amortizing the payments. We did interest only, so it keeps it lower for the buyer, so they don't have to pay principal and interest. They're just doing interest. And then we had a 10-year balloon on it. So kind of what you're saying, they're going to have to pay off. They didn't actually have to pay off the whole loan, but at 10 years, they needed to pay off that $70,000 because they're not paying anything on it the 70 years. The seller is just getting $165 a month of passive income for financing that $70,000. And then the entry fee was $45,000 that paid the cash to the seller, assignment, agent fee, closing costs was all paid, that was paid out of there. And then the monthly PITI, so that's your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, that monthly payment was about $1,800. There was a $70 HOA, and it ranged for around $2,000. The person that bought it, their exit strategy was a midterm rental, I believe. And so they're going to furnish it. They're going to rent it to traveling professionals and things like that for 30 days or more. It couldn't be a short-term rental because it had an HOA. So just know your exit strategy if you're buying one of these and what you're going to do with it. Any questions on this one? And it was a nice house. Like, it was turnkey. There was no issues or anything. So it's a great opportunity for someone. Questions? That's pretty much it. What are your guys' thoughts on subject 2? Would you do one? Would you not do one? Alex says yes, he would do one. Matt would do one.
I got a question on, if you don't, the loan gets called due, and you can either have the money up front and pay the loan off. Let's say you didn't have the money. I know you could go get a loan, hard money loan or something, to just get by temporarily, but what other exit strategies would you have?
Typically, in our paperwork, if the loan is called due, we'll transfer the deed back to the seller, and then it becomes I think it's called an agreement for sale or a contract for deed. It's kind of like when you buy a new car, you're going to get the pink slip once you've made a certain amount of payments or all the payments, and then you get that title. I think, is it called pink slip or title in cars? When you buy a car? Title? Okay. So yeah, you're going to get that once you've paid off all the payments, and that's very similar to how that would work. It's not as ideal for investors because there's some question on who can take the depreciation from that. So it's like a plan B, but it is a way to work around the due on sale clause because then it usually suffices the lender from there being a transfer of ownership because the deed is still, the legal title is still owned by the seller. Another option is sometimes you just talk to the bank and say, hey, here's all the paperwork we have. We've been making these payments for 36 months, and it's never been an issue. You're still getting your payments, and that can suffice as well.
Which if they were in foreclosure and stuff, you're basically showing good faith to the bank that
Yeah.
I brought everything back up to par again and stuff.
Yeah.
So why call the loan back?
And banks aren't in the business of like taking properties back. They don't want the properties. So it's more hassle. They lose money. I've heard a lot of stats about how much money, a bank loses on an auction. So it's not, it's not what they're looking for. They just want to receive the interest and monthly payments on a bunch of different loans. So, but there's a couple other ways to handle that too. That's just 2 or 3 of the main ones we use. But again, it's in the paperwork up front, so we know what's going to happen if that happens. Anybody else?
What was the first subject to deal you did?
It was in Santa Cruz, California. It was on market for like 6 months, and it was in the forest, like crazy roads to get to it, and it was not very desirable for a lot of buyers at that time. I think it was in 2022, and just right after the market had peaked, interest rates went up. I think it was 6 months, maybe December of 2022. And so it just sat on market forever. And the sellers hated living. It was their first time living in the forest. And when I'm talking forest, this is like up a mountain, like 3,000 feet from the ocean, There's big redwood forest. There's tons of rain. All these huge trees like fall on your house. It's like a lot of work to live out there, and it's not for everybody. And these were, some guys from Silicon Valley. They were tech workers. They did not want to live in the forest anymore, and so they made it about a year and a half, and they were just like ready to leave. And so it was it was just a straight subject to deal, and yeah.
Did you then rent it out? Or?
That one I wholesaled to a buyer that did a short-term rental in it. She didn't spend a ton of money fixing up, but she did a great job like furnishing it, and that was her goal, was to do her first short-term rental. She was in what's that Bigger Pockets guy's name? Rob, the short-term rental guy? Rob, whatever his name is. But yeah, went through this whole thing, and she was like ready to buy a short-term rental, and she knew what to do. So worked out well. Any other questions?
Yeah, so you said that prefacing the deal with really good paperwork and everything, but is there also some amount of salesmanship that goes with making sure that the seller trusts you, that you're going to be doing the right thing with their name on the line?
Yeah, and it's like a lot of rapport building up front, using examples of other deals that we've done successfully, hopping on Zooms or meeting them in person, talking to the realtor, things like that. But yeah, like I said, it's like a marriage. So you're kind of bringing two people together, and you want them to know what's going on and be cordial in this relationship as it goes on. So yeah, it does take a lot of not coercing, but you gotta bring it out and see. You give them all the information, and you address any concerns that they have. And if it's a great fit for them, they'll do it. If it's not a fit for them, they won't do it.
Right. Because I know you said sometimes they're highly motivated, so it doesn't maybe take as much coercing per se.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
On the other ends, if they're teetering, you would want to have some sort of personability to them to make sure that they feel safe and this is the right idea.
Yeah, there's definitely an art to negotiating these deals and bringing it forth, because you can't just hey, there's a lot of people that just watch a video online and they're like, oh, I can go call a realtor and talk about this and see if they'll sell me this because I have no money and I want to buy a house, 0 money down, 0% interest, and there's all these, these deals exist, but they're like unicorn deals. So, but that's what a lot of people will go after, and they're not going to build the rapport with the realtor or the seller without having done this 100 times before.
So let's say you don't have
No.
let's say you
I've talked to 100 people.
let's say you don't have that stat sheet to back you up though, how would you go into that deal like you did in Santa Cruz, how would
A lot of times we leverage the expertise of somebody else in Sub 2.
Okay.
So I use a transaction coordinator, and he hopped on the phone with me, and he was one of the original students of Sub 2, knew everything. He just came out with his own book this summer about Subject to and seller finance transactions. And so he hopped on the phone with me and the seller and the realtor, and we talked through some of their big concerns. And he's been in the industry for 30 years. So I leveraged him. We paid him his transaction coordination fee, and he did all the paperwork. So I lean on him a lot to make sure, because I'm not the expert in all the little things down the road, and we don't have to be. You use other people that know what they're doing in those situations and have experience, and then you can team up. Pace gives a letter of, or proof of funds and different things like that, credibility emails, and will sometimes lend his credibility so that you can do your first deal type of thing. And then that trickles down to a lot of people in Sub 2. If you wanted to do a deal and you had an opportunity, you could bring it to me or to Jacob or to anybody else and say hey, I need help, negotiating this deal. I want to do this deal. I want to buy it, or I want to wholesale it, and we can work with you to, make it through the finish line. And that's what this whole thing is about. It's not a sales thing for Sub 2. It's not for me to get a bunch of listings or anything like that. This is so that we can all come together, talk. I'm not the expert on everything. That's why I'm not going to talk every single week. We want people to do deals together, and talk about things that we're doing, learn new things. So if you have something you want to share and you're like an expert on, we'd love to have you talk about it, even if it's like 10 minutes. You don't need to go like an hour or whatever. We'd love to hear from you. And like I want to be a resource for anybody on the things that I can help on. Like I just want to support you guys. So
So everything's relative. I mean, we're all different. We all
yeah.
a deal's a deal, but it's different. One might make $5,000, one might make 50, or one might make 500.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the beginning, you were really surprised at the deal. You say, I made a lot of money. Not to be real personal, but in these deals, what would you say is a reasonable fee, for calling it, you just alluded to using different people. So if you, whether you assign it or not, or just give them a consultation fee or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you're comfortable, give me some numbers that are normal for what you're doing.
It depends, obviously, on the market and the area of the U.S. But the average, like assignment fee in the U.S. is $15,000. But some people will do an assignment for $5,000. Some will do $50,000. And like I came from California. I lived there for 13 years, and the average there was like 25,000. But I've had ones that went way higher than that, and I've had ones that went lower than that. And some I've partnered with other people. Somebody brought a buyer, so they got a portion of it, things like that. So it's like a team sport a lot of times in these scenarios, getting a deal done.
Best deal where everybody's happy.
Yeah. 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 That's try to have an abundance mindset rather than a lot of real estate. It seems like, and people that aren't part of communities, it's more of a scarcity mindset. So that's kind of what we want to bring forth is abundance and doing deals together. Do you have a question?
Yeah, the gentleman you jumped on the phone with your seller, his services, what kind of price ranges are those? What would you expect that to be in a deal? Is it a percentage? Is it?
Usually it's a flat fee, and then they'll have different fees based off of whether it's a cash deal, subject to deal, a seller finance, a hybrid. They usually have a scale. A seller finance with a subject to a hybrid deal and, adding something else in there, that will take a lot more work than just a simple cash deal. There's not a whole lot that goes into the cash side of things. But if you're doing, 20 deals in 2 months, like it's a lot to keep track of. So you want a transaction coordinator to do a lot of that work for you so that you're not missing paperwork, and you don't want to spend the time like learning all the paperwork details so that everything is done correctly. You can keep going and doing more deals.
If you
But
were to do
1,000
subject to with the hybrid, what kind of price range?
probably like $1,500 to $2,500. Cash would be like $800 to $1,000 depending on where you are.
And they just help you with the acquisition. They don't help you with the servicing the debt. In other words, doing the third party.
No, they set if they're that's another section of sub 2. They have top tier TCs. They're like trained in doing everything correctly because there's things you have to do with insurance to make sure the due on sales clause isn't called. There's just all these little details of it, and so you want to make sure you have somebody who knows what they're doing and they've done it before. And so yeah, anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500, I would say, on a creative transaction. And less for anything more basic.
You mentioned a deal that you said you gave up on, or something happened that it wasn't a short sale, but there was too much debt, or they couldn't get around what they owed, and yet they didn't want foreclosure.
Yeah,
So what happened in that one in the end? You just let it go?
they're still sitting on market. They're
Because they don't want the foreclosure.
they don't want to do the short sale because it'll ding them, and they don't want to do they obviously don't want to lose it to a foreclosure because they'll also get dinged because she wants to buy another house, but they're going through a divorce, so there's some division between the two, and so it makes it, you got to have everybody on board if they're both on the mortgage to go forward. One wants to do it, one doesn't want to do it, so it's probably just going to sit for a little bit longer. A lot of times when you go and try to negotiate with one of these, it's going to be a couple months down the road that they actually come back and say, hey, we're ready to do that plan B. We have not got any other options in 2 or 3 months, and we're running out of money. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, Josh,
Oh, James, go ahead. James,
you
right?
talked about the top tier transaction coordinators and how there's something with the insurance, right? You want to make sure you set appropriately. So, do you typically keep the seller's insurance on the mortgage, or do you have the opportunity to bring in your own insurance, or is that trigger that due on sale?
Yeah, for some reason, the insurance is one of the big reasons that due on sale clause gets called, is because I think the insurance company notifies the company if you lose coverage on it. And I don't know if that's exactly why, but they will get notified if there's no coverage on the property, because that's part of the stipulation of the mortgage, is that you're going to have insurance for the life of the loan on it. And so typically what's done, the TC will leave that policy in place for like a month or two that they have. You leave that there. Transaction coordinator, I think. Okay, sorry, I abbreviated. And then, so we'll leave that one in place for a month or two, and then you'll get another policy, and the new owner will be the primary on it, and then there's an additionally insured. So that old buyer, or the seller, is going to be the additionally insured on that new policy, and that usually keeps everybody calm that that person is still on the loan. They're not going to receive the first amount, but if there was like something, the person goes missing and a storm comes and blows the roof off, like they could still get paid out. If they take the house back, they could get paid out for that insurance claim.
Gotcha. And then when you're closing the deal through the transaction coordinator, it still goes through a title company, right? But the title company doesn't disclose to the mortgage company that transfer of deeds occurred?
Yeah, and which is banks, and I was just talking to a banker the other day about this, because this is the first time you've ever heard of it. And he's like, well, you're right. We don't actually just like sit there and go look at all public records and see like, oh, this property, it transferred. Sure. And a lot of times they'll transfer into LLCs that the owner actually owns, and they're just putting it into LLC or a trust. So a lot of like transfers happen. And so it'd be kind of hard to go through and just like, oh, this isn't a brand new name. So usually if we are buying it, we'll buy it in an LLC, so that it's not as like, oh, this went from John to Tim.
It's documented, but it's just not actively monitored.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, they could go through and look if they wanted to, but if the payments are being made, it's not really a big deal to them typically.
Yeah, makes sense.
Jared, do you have a question?
Yeah, so for the Subto deals you've done or you've seen done that have been on the market, you said you typically would pay the listing agent their commission.
Yeah, people do it different ways. Some people will offer to pay literally everything. But at the end of the day, it's still cash that's coming from the buyer. So that's always like a weird thing for me, because whether you say you're giving them 30 grand and the seller pays that listing commission, or the buyer pays it, like we still have a price that we're going to pay, and it's not really going to change. So it's more of the wording. Usually.
Would you say it's difficult to work with agents, Like just today, like on one of my listings, I got an email with like a subject to offer.
Yeah.
And I didn't hop on that email as quick as if it was from another agent, and I'm going to a Subto meetup tonight, so it's like just knowing that, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
More work.
I mean, it's definitely more work, and you kind of want to like, especially if it's fresh on market, you want to wait for, the plan A. But then, 30, 60 days go by. Realtors don't really have a whole lot of, new flashy marketing tactics to get their property sold. So at a certain point, the realtor is probably going to want their commission. And so if you can, say, hey, we're still going to pay your commission, then they start going to be like, okay, like let's hear this out now. It's been 60 days. We haven't got any offers. So, but a lot of people will just like, no, like this isn't for them. We've had this before. Like,
That makes sense.
so you gotta break through that barrier a lot of times, and that comes with like what Jim was talking about, just like building rapport, and learning how to talk to the realtors about them specifically. Anybody else?
So I'm curious, it seemed like most of the deals that you were kind of referring to or referencing were not sub-twos that you were keeping as long-term holds, but ones where you were assigning or selling to somebody else.
Yep.
But how are you marketing those? Are you putting those on the MLS or is it other sources? Or?
Typically, a lot of times I've sold it to people in Subto, and we have internal like Discord channels where we can all post our deals, or Facebook. I've sold a lot of stuff on Facebook, getting people that way, and then you just eventually start, you start marketing one deal. You might talk to 15 people on it, and it's a no for 10 of them, but 5 wanted it. But you now have 15 more contacts that are looking for deals in that area, similar to what you're getting. So you try to figure out what are they buying or what do they want to buy. Then can you go find that, and then you go bring it to them. So it's very similar to what a realtor does, but your audience is just different for wholesaling. Your audience is not somebody that's going to live there, and they're typically not looking on market a whole lot. So you want to bring them something that's packaged. So if you can bring them on market deal that is packaged into a subject to, now you're selling a house that's on market with financing in place, and you're packaging them together, and now you're selling that to an investor, and you're adding value to the whole chain of real estate, and you're bringing a house that's sitting there dead, and you're making it something that someone wants to buy.
Yeah, because I'm not part of the sub-2 community, so
Yeah.
it's like that makes sense. It's mostly investors within the sub-2.
Yeah, and I just try to talk to people and get their buy boxes, and so yeah. So yeah, if you want to buy something, like you can talk to me, and I'll try to figure out what you want to buy and try to get you it. So all good? Cool. All right. Well, if we can hang out more, if you guys want to sit and talk, ask me any questions, or talk to anybody else, you guys can network here. As we stayed open until 10 last month, so feel free to hang out or get out of here if you want to. But thank you, everybody.